more problems for a troubled
earthquake.
singer. Yep,
We're having an earthquake. Okay, it appears to have stopped.
So I just took my shot of this stuff, and hopefully these people are going to become an advertiser, Magic Mind, because this stuff is unbelievable. It's just natural herbs, and I swear to God, it feels like I'm doing coke. Anyway, wish I was kidding. No, I don't wish. Anyway, we have our special guest back to the show. Carol Roth is with us. She's an American television personality, best-selling author, entrepreneur, radio host, and investor who has appeared as a guest on Fox Business, CNN, CNBC. She's one of the judges on Mark Burnett's America's Greatest Makers television show and is a weekly panelist on the current events and business show Bulls and Bears. What is she doing on this show? She authored the New York Times bestseller, The Entrepreneur Equation, and her latest book right here, You Will Own Nothing. You Will Own Nothing, Your War with the New Financial World Order and How to Fight Back. Here it is right there. Please welcome back to the show, Carol Roth. Hi, Carol. How are you?
Hey, Jimmy. I'm doing great. You know, it's funny. I kind of feel like I always come here to talk about something depressing and financial instead of talking about like ice cream or puppy dogs or something.
Well,
so
I go to someone else. I have a fat guy I go to when I talk about ice cream. But you look like you're right off your Red Shoe Diary shoot, and nice to see you as always.
Yes, thank you.
So the reason I wanted to bring you on, because I saw this disturbing bit of Bank of America is sitting on $700 billion in bonds bought at 1% yields in 2020. Those bonds are down 40%, hiding $100 billion in losses. Meanwhile, the Treasury needs to refinance. So let's listen to what this guy has to say. Who is this guy?
Porter Stansberry.
Okay. Oh, look, thank God you know who that guy is. Here's what he has to say about this.
Our largest, most important financial institution today is Bank of America. Bank of America has something over $2 trillion in deposits. It has 40% of all the deposits in the United States. It is the banking system. Well, they invested almost $700 billion in bonds during the COVID summer, the summer of 2020, when long-term 30-year interest rates were at 1%. The value of those bonds has gone down almost in a straight line, and I think those bonds are now down something like 40%. Could be a little bit more now. I haven't seen the latest price. But the point is they're hiding enormous losses. They say those losses today, Bank of America has disclosed, there's something on the order of $100 billion. Okay, so if Trump destroys this recycling of U.S. debt that has gone on for 50 years, what that also means is he's destroying the ability of the Treasury to refinance. We've got $9 trillion worth of treasuries to refinance this year, plus another roughly $2.5 trillion of new debt. So Treasury's got to go out and sell $11 trillion worth of treasuries this year. I don't know how that's possible if Japan isn't buying, if China isn't buying. And by the way, not only are they not buying, the world's been selling our treasuries on a net basis now for 3 or 4 years, and they've been buying gold instead. And so I think you can look at the price of gold versus the share price of Bank of America, and you can see something bad coming down the pipe.
So before I continue that, I just want to explain to people, because I didn't know, I want to make it as easy to understand for someone as dumb as me. So when you buy a bond, they're also called T-bills, Treasury bills, right, Carol?
So it depends on the duration. If it's very short term, so up to, I believe it's a year, it's considered a bill. If it's 2 years to 10 years, it's considered a note. And if it's over 10 years, it's considered a bond. Oh, okay. So yes. I thought, so, when the yield, meaning if I buy I'll get like an interest rate when I buy a bond, which is what a yield is. So I thought when that goes up, that's good. I thought that would be good news, because now more people are going to want to buy those bonds, because you're going to get more money back when you buy a treasury bond. But that's actually a sign of economic weakness of the country. Could you explain why that is? Okay, so I'm going to try and make this as easy to understand as possible. And by the way, they always make this opaque. They don't want any of us to understand this. So this is way overcomplicated. It depends if you hold your bond to the maturity date or if you resell it in the market. So let's say we want to invest in a T-bill for a year. We put $100 in. It says it's a 5% yield. assuming that the U.S. government doesn't go bankrupt or default in the meantime, at the end of the year, you're going to get your $100 back, and you're going to get your 5% on that. So you're going to make $105, and you're going to say, fantastic, I made my 5%. That's great. What happens, though, is if you go into the market, if you want to do buying and selling, and you don't want to hold that to that end maturity date, that 1 year point. And the best way I can have people think about it is think about a seesaw, because the bond's price and the yield trade in the inverse. So as we said, this was flat. This was our $100 and our 5% yields. It's fine if we hold it to maturity. But if we go in the market and we sell it, if that yield goes up, then on the seesaw, the bond's price goes down. The same thing happens on the inverse. If the bond's price goes up, then the yield goes down. And that's how I always remember it. I remember that seesaw. So when you think about what's happened over the past few years, we had this zero interest rate policy. There were very low yields. That's when everybody was buying these bonds, right? And so if there's low yields, it's a high price of the bond. So then the Fed raises the interest rates, and the yields to some extent follow. And so as the yields go up, what happens? That bond price goes down in the market if you're forced to sell it. Now, again, if you hold it to maturity, whether that's a year or 10 years or 30 years, it doesn't matter. You're going to get back with, what it is that you expected in your yield. The problem is if you are forced to sell it. Does that help sort of explain the at least kind of backdrop here, Jim?
So it seems counterintuitive. If the money you're going to get back from buying a bond goes up, so if that meaning the yield goes up, from 5%, say to 6%, the price of it goes down. It would think to me that the price would go up because you're going to get more money for it.
So the yield is this, we're going to get really wonky here, but it's not just the interest rate, but it's the capital that you're getting back. And that's why there's a disconnect here in terms of the price of the bond and the yield. All you need to remember is that the bond prices and the yields trade in the inverse. Okay. And that's all that matters.
That's all that matters
to the discussion.
Okay.
Right?
And this is important because this guy is telling us that there's a big a possibility of a collapse of Bank of America coming, and I'll let him finish. I'll let him finish.
Because if there is a failed auction ever, or if the Fed has to come in and start buying again, which is what they will do, the inflation expectations are going to go crazy, and no one sees this. There will be a run on Bank of America, and there will be a day where the ATM machines do not work. And by the way, people say, oh, that could never happen. Bullshit. It happens all the time. Fractional reserve banking systems fail all the time. They're built to fail. And that's what happened in 1932. And of course, what did the government do? The government seized all the gold in the country in 33. So I see a clear set of circumstances, like I did with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, that to me, the numbers are crystal clear. What's different about America as opposed to Japan in 89 is Japan had like a 25% domestic savings rate. They had enough domestic savings that they could afford for their government to be 200% plus of GDP in debt. We can't because we have no domestic savings. Total domestic savings in the United States is less than $5 trillion. Less than. There's no way we can refi 11 trillion plus in bonds in 1 year because we don't have the domestic savings to do it, which means we depend on the kindness of strangers. And yet, what are we doing? We're pissing in those strangers' Cheerios. That is not good treasury management. And I'm telling you, this will happen this year. The Fed is going to have to go in to buy bonds again. And when that QE, quote unquote, starts again, the long-term yield on treasuries is going to go well above 6%. I think it'll go above 7%. Could easily go above 10%. Nobody sees that coming. Nobody's pricing Bank of America equity right now at 10% treasury yield. In fact, if you want to have some fun, go ask Grok. Hey, Grok, which is, X's AI. Tell me what the situation looks like for Bank of America if treasury yields go above 10%. How could the bank survive? There's a reason why the world's best informed investors.
Okay, so can you explain what? So he said that so people aren't buying treasury. So he's saying so China is actually dumping their treasury bonds, right? And he's saying that the other countries aren't buying them, so the Fed is going to have to go buy them. And that's going to raise the yield, which will lower the price of them, and that's bad. So is that am I close to what he's saying?
So that was a lot of information, and I feel like everyone's head probably is about to explode after listening to that. So there's kind of two pieces of this, and I'm happy to take it in whichever order you'd like. We can talk about the run on the bank and why, like what happened with Silicon Valley Bank, why that is potentially analogous or not analogous to Bank of America.
Talk about that.
So let's talk about that first, and then we can address the issues with the debt because they're definitely related, but they're two different issues. And he's sort of conflating a lot of different things that I think if we don't understand the basics, are going to be challenging. So if you remember back in 2023, we had a major banking crisis and Silicon Valley and some others went bankrupt. There were bank runs and the Fed had to step in to basically secure, quote unquote, the financial system. And so what had happened was that all of these people during the easy money times went and they deposited their money at the bank. And then, the bank said, okay, well, I need to do something with this money. Well, normally the bank makes loans, but if they don't have enough loans to make, then they want to put it into something that is quote unquote safe. And what do? They put it into these treasury bonds that we're talking about, as well as mortgage-backed securities in some cases. Now, the case with Silicon Valley Bank, what had happened was a couple of things. One is that when people decided that they wanted to get their money back because the rates started going up, maybe they wanted to invest in a treasury bond instead, or a money market fund, or maybe their economic situation changed. All of a sudden, Silicon Valley Bank was forced to sell some of these treasuries. And as we said, if you hold them to maturity, it's not a problem for Silicon Valley Bank. But if you're forced to sell them because people want their money back and you don't have that money back to give them without selling the treasuries, then you're selling at a loss. What happened?
Because the price of that bond has gone down.
Exactly.
And if
the rates went up, so the bond price went down.
So the price that they paid for it, they're not going to recoup that money.
Correct.
And so that's where the loss comes in.
And that gets a loss and then compounded against their customers. So normally, if there's a little bit of that, it's not a big deal. What happened with Silicon Valley Bank is not only was their business model really focused on deposits. It was something like 90% of their liabilities were these deposits. And then of those liabilities, 93% of those, Jimmy, were not FDIC insured. So the people who had their money in the bank freaked out. They knew, if I'm not the first person in line, that all of these aren't insured and that money is at risk and that there's a potential loss. And there was a run on that bank, and that's what ended up bringing it down. So if you take that and you apply that to Bank of America, what is different about Bank of America, and I'm not saying it doesn't completely absolve them because they do have an insane amount of treasuries on their balance sheets, and there are a lot of issues with our financial system, and I'm not opining on that, but just so that people can understand the difference is that Bank of America has less of their liabilities and deposits. They have a more diversified business line. I think compared to the 90% of Silicon Valley Bank, it's something like 70% of Bank of America, but they have far fewer of those counts that are not FDIC insured. I think that their rate the last time I saw was under 40% versus 93% from Silicon Valley Bank. So, if you have that insurance, you're less concerned about, I have to pull this out, and there's less of a need to quote unquote make a run on the bank. So that creates a little bit of a difference. The other thing is that the Fed, if you remember, stepped in and they created this program to basically backstop the banks. Bank of America, is, as he said, the banking system. They own a piece of the New York Fed. I mean, they're entrenched into the system. So that the idea that the Fed wouldn't step in if something happened with Bank of America, which is less likely than Silicon Valley Bank, but certainly not, completely improbable. They're going to be more incentivized unless they want to collapse the entire system. And that's a whole separate discussion. So, could there be an ATM freeze at some point? Absolutely, there could be, but there could be because of a cyber attack. There could be because of an internal glitch. There could be for all kinds of reasons, including possibly a bank run. And that means for you as a listener, the way that you protect yourself is always having some cash on hand. Don't be in a situation where you don't have the ability to get you through several days without having cash. And the other thing, the big takeaway here is make sure you have insurance if you have a deposit. If you are with a traditional bank, it's FDIC. If you're with a credit union, it's NCUA. You want to make sure all of your deposits are insured, and you need to go to those financial institutions and ask them to make sure if something does go awry that you have that insurance in place.
Okay. And so
that's the first piece.
Okay. So he's saying Bank of America bought all these bonds at 1% yield, and now the yields are going up. So the price of those bonds that they bought are going down. So if they have to sell them, they're going to take a big hit. And he's claiming that their loss will be $100 billion potentially
if they had to sell them. But again, unless they have everybody trying to pull their money out of the bank and they have less people, their business is less dependent on those deposits than other areas. They have wealth management. They have all kinds of other things that they do. It's a less likely of a scenario that they're going to be in a position where they're forced. The other thing that I will tell you, and this is a total cluster, is that the Treasury and the Fed, they're talking about deregulation for the banking system right now. There's something called the supplementary leverage ratio, SLR, is what you will see them refer it to. And it's basically a calculation of how much capital a bank needs to have on hand for it to be considered safe. They want to roll that back. They want to take away those protections, of course, so that, and this ties into the second piece, which we'll go over of what Porter was saying, so that the banks can actually buy more treasuries. Because he is right. We don't have enough buyers of treasuries to finance and refinance our debt, which we could talk about. And so they want Bank of America to actually be able to buy more treasuries. So the likelihood is that they're going to find a way for that to happen, and to backstop it, it is the most likely outcome. It doesn't mean that the other outcome isn't a possibility, but from a probability, they are counting on that as a mechanism to buy our debt that nobody else wants. Okay.
All right. Wow. That's well, it sounds like you have two bad options, right? Right. So either you deregulate, which makes the bank more vulnerable to collapse, or if you don't, that means that no one's going to buy the treasury bonds, which means that the country's debt will overwhelm it. And so two bad scenarios. Either wow, that's bad. And so tell me the second part.
Okay. So the second piece of what he's been talking about is the idea that we are basically on the verge of a debt crisis, which is something I think you and I have talked about before. I think, pretty much everybody in the world has talked about this, although there's been no political will to actually do anything about it. They just like to talk about the fact that it's an issue. What he said is that we have all this debt that needs to be financed, and it's true, because what they did during the last administration is, because there aren't the buyers of our debt, he said central banks haven't been buying for the last few years. It's actually about the last 10 to 11 years on net. They have been net sellers versus buyers, and he's correct. They've been putting gold into their reserves instead of another country's currency. That we have all of this debt, and everybody who's left as a buyer, because they're not central banks who are just going to buy them to have them in their reserves, are now what we call price sensitive buyers, that they care about the price and they're demanding more yield, right? They want a higher interest rate, a higher coupon to hold on to it, because, they say, well, I don't really trust the government. If I'm going to hold on to this for a long time, I have less confidence in it. So I'm going to demand more for the risk that I'm taking, which is supposed to be risk free. And that's why you don't have the demand at these lower yields, and that ends up pushing the yields up higher. So we do have this issue. And what the past administration had been doing is that because there aren't enough people who want to buy a 10-year note, for example, they said, okay, well, we'll sell you a 30-day or a 60-day or a year. How about that? And we'll give you a nice interest rate on that. So there's been a lot of demand. In fact, Warren Buffett owns about 5% of what's called that short duration, the T-bill market, and just collecting a coupon on that. There's a lot of short-term demand, but there isn't a lot of long-term demand. And the challenge is, because it expires in 30 days or a year, you have to refinance that every 30 days or a year. So you keep cycling that back into the market. And then we have our deficits. Well, we ran a $2 trillion deficit. We need to finance that as well. And because we have all of this supply that's going to the market and not enough demand, well, what does that do? That pushes down the price of the bond and it pushes up the yield. And so that's what we're seeing over and over. And that's been the driver of what's been going on with the 10-year yield and why it keeps going higher and higher, and why he's saying that it's likely to continue to go higher. The issue at which he says what happens at 6 or 10%, you don't even get there, because the entire bond market basically dysfunctions and pukes all over itself, and we end up having things fall apart. So every time we get close to that range, and the range that usually sets it off is close to 5% on the 10-year. We're about 4.5, 4.6 right now. So as we get to 5%, it sets it off. Then the Fed or somebody else steps in and they come in and they start buying bonds. We've seen this before with QE, or they come up with another cute name for the program so that they can say, okay, now we have more demand in the market, and then we're going to pull down the price of that yield. The challenge is for us is we know that's really inflationary. This is taking money from nowhere and putting it into the system, and it drives up inflation, and we end up paying the price for that. And so there are a lot of huge issues. There are a lot of ways, by the way, that the Treasury or the Fed can solve this in the short term. But the problem is, if we don't fix this, we're just going to continue to run into this into the long term until we have a full-blown crisis, because there's no more chances to fix it, or inflation goes, so high and gets so crazy, that we're all in like the Weimar Republic. So that's really the challenge here. And so it's somewhat related, in my opinion, to what he's talking about, but there's also just kind of a separate standalone issue with the debts. And when we talk about the interest that we're paying on the debt right now, we're paying over $1 trillion now for stuff we've already bought. If those yields go higher and we have to pay more to finance our debt, well, that explodes our deficit. And what do we just say about that, Jimmy? That means that we have more supply of treasuries. So that pushes up the yields, which means we're paying more for interest, which explodes our deficits. And we get this spiral. It's called a debt spiral. And again, that creates a big issue. And that's assuming we don't even have something like a recession, which would completely blow the whole thing apart based on where our debt and our deficit stands today.
And so the fiscally responsible thing for the government to do is to cut government spending and cut our deficit, which would then and try to lower our debt. So deficit is how much money you spend per year over what you take in. The debt is the overall amount of money that you owe. So we have a $36 trillion debt right now, and our deficit every year is several trillion, right?
About 2 trillion.
2 trillion, yeah.
And so to put that in context, we take in, like government took in last year $5 trillion. That is more than the GDP, the output of every single country in the world other than the US and China. So we give the government more money than the output of every country in the world other than US and China. And they say, hey, that's not enough. We're going to spend another 2 trillion. And by the way, if we go back to 2019 before COVID, the spending was 4.4 trillion. So we'd have more than $500 billion surplus if we could roll the spending back to that level. Now, obviously, there's issues and a lot of choreography that needs to go and reasons why that's a challenge. But just to give some sort of perspective to the issue, it's not like the government's not getting any money. They're getting a ton of money, and they still are running these massive deficits, which as a basis of GDP, which is kind of how we measure it, it's a wartime level deficit, without us being in war or being in a recession. Yeah.
And so instead of the current budget that just passed the House, instead of them
Correct.
reducing the deficit and the debt overall, it's actually adding. It's going to add not only so we have a $2 trillion a year deficit. It's going to add on to that. It's not going so at the end of 10 years we'll have an extra $3 trillion in debt because of this latest budget, right? And so why do you think? I had Steve Bannon on and he talked about how. The whole point of Doge and the whole point of this is that we have to make painful cuts or else
Right.
to save our financial system. And we got to do that. Well, they're not doing it. So all that Doge was just a smokescreen. I keep trying to explain to people that we're not actually saving that money because any money that they saved in Doge, they're just now spending that plus more, giving it to the Pentagon.
Yeah, the challenge is that they identified waste, fraud, and abuse, which is great. And then they said to Congress, here's the areas that you can cut. And Congress did not have the political will to say, okay, we're going to pull this out.
They didn't even vote on it.
Yeah, they just papered over it. And it's very frustrating because the GOP presents itself as fiscally conservative and against spending up until the time that they have control and the ability to do something about it. And then they're not fiscally conservative. And so we really do have this uniparty that, talks a big game, but nobody really wants to address this critical issue. And it's across the board. If you have Doge that identifies waste, fraud, and abuse in all the different programs, we're not saying take away benefits. We're just saying reduce this money across the board. If somebody is getting Social Security that shouldn't, take them off. Same thing with Medicare. The same thing with, in the Pentagon, we need to have a defense budget, but you're telling me there's not waste, fraud, and abuse that you can cut back there. The same with a bunch of these programs. You need to do that across the board. And even if they did it in a phase out, because the other side of the coin, and I know this is going to sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but it's about a order of operations or choreography issue, is that there needs to be a plan to phase it out because the money that the government spends is in the GDP. We need the private sector to replace that. Otherwise, we're going to crash the GDP and that's going to end up exploding the deficit anyway. But for them to come out and say, okay, we have a 3-year plan to phase out this waste, fraud, and abuse and have these people who are on, the government dole move into the private sector. And this is how we're going to do it so that we can maintain the GDP and reduce spending. That would be a very welcome step and really shouldn't be that difficult to do. The challenge is we have moral hazard in the way that our government is created, and the people who make these decisions bear no risk or accountability. And so, it is not to their benefit to do something where their constituents can come back and say, oh, well, I wanted you to cut, but I didn't want you to cut my program. And that's the political issue. But, you can't kick the can down the road for forever. It's not an infinite thing. There's eventually you go off the cliff, and based on where our debt to GDP, our deficits to GDP, our interest, which has exceeded our defense spending at this point in time stands today. This is why we have a hair on fire debt problem. This is why you're seeing the warnings from Porter Stansberry and from other people that, something really needs to be done. And it's just such a disappointment that we're not seeing it done from the people who have been, espousing that they were going to do it, especially when we had this whole Doge program that's identified the areas where they can do.
Well, I think the big problem with Doge is that they didn't go to the Pentagon, right? The Pentagon has never been able to pass an audit. They failed every audit ever given them. And we just keep giving them hundreds of billions of more dollars a year. So even if they did implement those Doge cuts, we still would have just added more money to the Pentagon anyway. So it's a wash. You don't get actually any savings. And the reason why you want to do Doge cuts is because we can get this deficit and debt under control so we can have a sound economic system in the United States. But they just leave out that whole part. So, and their unwillingness to go to the Pentagon. And we had Steve Bannon on saying, you'll know Doge is serious when they go across the Potomac to the Pentagon. Well, they didn't. And in fact, now, Donald Trump just unveiled his Golden Dome thing, which is a $175 billion program, which is going to go to at least $1 trillion. And
Sure.
so, my theory here is that just like when Joe Biden was allowed to pull out of Afghanistan, like he didn't decide to do that. He was allowed to by the people who control him. And I said, well, before you pat him on the back, what is he going to do with that money that we were spending in Afghanistan? He never said we're going to take that money and put it back in our country, or we're going to take the debt down. He didn't say any of that because they had another war in the chamber. So then all that money we were spending in Afghanistan, they just started spending it on Ukraine. So the people who actually control things, which is the military-industrial complex, which is what Eisenhower warned us against, they still get their money. So now if Trump is going to end the war in Ukraine and he's not going to do any more Middle Eastern wars and he's going to try and rein in the wars, well, he's not going to stop spending that money. He just now came up with this new program called the Golden Dome, so all the money we're going to be saving by not doing these wars, we're just going to give it to the defense contractors anyway, because they got to get their cut.
Sure. And I think that, I'm somebody who does think that we need to have, a important, reasonable level of defense spending because we need to defend ourselves. But there have been many, I don't know if you'd call them audits, but many people who have insights and have identified, all kinds of insanity in terms of how much they're paying for just, everything from toilet paper to nuts and bolts. It's kind of like the healthcare system is that they're getting, completely screwed, although it's intentional, right? We know it's with a wink and a nudge. And so if we put that up to competitive bids, if we actually went in there with a business mind, which is, I think, what Elon Musk was trying to do. And frankly, I think part of the reason that he stepped away is the frustration that there are these obvious things that can be done, and there is no political will because of the cronyism that you talked about to actually make it happen. And it's frustrating because there was a mandate from the American people, bipartisan, who wanted Doge, who wanted us to have fiscal responsibility, who wanted to stop the inflation, who wanted to do the things so that the American people could reclaim the American dream. And the only way we can do that is with fiscal responsibility starting at Congress, because what they are doing will just lead to, as I said, rampant inflation, and is going to take your productivity and your dollars and make them worthless, to benefit a handful of people. And that is not capitalism. That is not the American way.
Right. That's crony capitalism, which is not capitalism. That's corruption. And so I think what you said, there was a bipartisan agreement, and then I think people would be willing to feel a little pain. Like, okay, you want to cut some stuff out of Social Security or Medicaid or Medicare. Okay. But as long as we saw, well, we're also cutting the Pentagon, which is way,
right.
We spend more on our defense budget each year than the next 10 countries combined. So, and we don't really have an enemy. No one's looking to attack us. So this is just money going, as Eisenhower warned us against. And so, if they were at least willing to do that, I think people would be more willing to take those cuts to programs that they like. But
not only that, we're spending more on interest than we're spending on the defense.
That's right.
Which you cannot have a strong functioning country if you're spending more on things you've already bought than you're spending on your defense. And if you were able to say, hey, we're going to make sure that we're not spending all this money on interest so that, we can then ramp up these programs, or we can do more things in the future, and we had a clear path, I agree with you. I think people would be willing to do it. But the challenge is that we don't believe it. Even if Congress were willing to do it for a day, a week, a year, what's going to rein them in down the road when things are starting to, get balanced? What protections do we have in place that they're not just going to ramp up the spending again? Until we have these assurances, there are people who frankly don't need Social Security, right? Warren Buffett probably gets Social Security, and Bill Gates and whatnot. There are people who could opt out of Social Security. Why would they do that unless there was an assurance of fiscal responsibility from Congress on the other end? If you got those assurances, I think there are a lot of compromises that we can make, but without them, nobody's willing to be the one to say, okay, I'm going to take the hit, when you know that Congress is just going to go back to its cronyist ways.
So things are, turns out everything's going to get worse. They're not doing the things they need to do to make things better, and we could go into a debt spiral. You think?
Well, I think that they're going to do whatever they can to prevent that from happening. So there are lots of different ways that they can buy themselves some time. And we could go through all different kinds of crazy machinations. But at the end of the day, whether they decide to write up the price of gold and put more money into the treasury so that, they buy down some debt, or whether they they give people low cost loans to take the equity out of their house and invest in treasuries, or whether the Fed just comes in and buys them. I mean, there's all different things. We could spend a whole day on crazy different ways they could do that. I think that they will step in and do that. The challenge is twofold, as I said. One, the first and foremost is that it's inflationary. And so that on the other side of whatever they do to save the debt spiral means that everyday Americans are going to pay the cost. And we've been through multiple years of this, and we know that it's not pleasant and it's been very challenging for everyday Americans. So, you're going to see that return. And then, at the end of the day, we only buy ourselves time. We can buy ourselves time, but if Congress doesn't fix it, then we just end up in that same situation again. So something has to be done here. And
so I was going to play some of that Ray Dalio stuff, but it's basically the same thing.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and you're welcome to do it, but he's saying the same thing, that he's seeing where our debt load stands, where our deficits stand, where our interest stands, and the reality of the world, the fact that we have less buyers for treasuries, the fact that, the financial world order has been shifting. And at the end of the day, there is going to be some kind of problem, and they have multiple paths. They can let everything completely implode, and maybe there's a full financial reset, or they can do what's politically palatable and let the release valve be inflation, because most people don't understand what the drivers of that is, and they can just blame somebody else for it.
All right. Well, Carol, I appreciate you explaining this to us. It was fantastic. I want to let everybody know you have a free economic newsletter at carolroth.com/news. So if you want to get your free financial information from Carol Roth, go to carolroth.com/news for her newsletter. That's great. I'm going to subscribe to that now. That'll be good. Maybe I won't need to have you come back on.
You can just explain it all for me.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jimmy. Always a pleasure to be with you. And I hope that people were able to at least take away a better understanding so they can make sense of all the craziness.
Well, I do. I certainly understand a little better. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Carol.
Thanks.
And I'll see you in September when we're in Chicago.
Yeah, in Chicago. Can't wait to see you. Everybody should go to the show.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Take care.
Right,
Jimmy, are you ready to go to Rumble?
Let's
you want to do one more story?
Yeah, let's do one more.
Okay, we'll do one more story. All right, sounds good. Here we go. All right, where's the beginning? Can we get some Jimmy Dore condoms? Dude needs to re-up, if you know what I mean. Corn Pop. Condoms.
I do not know what you mean.
Really? Condoms. All right. Misha says Corn Pop doesn't need to read up. If you all end up in Edinburgh after Glasgow, try Pizza Pilgrims on Rose Street.
I appreciate the tip. We're not going to end up in Edinburgh.
No, you've got McIlhany is super unique. MAIALE.
I would love to. The only time we have.
Oh, also they have a decent Negroni. Thank you, Mac.
The only time we have.
You can show Jimmy.
The only time we have to be tourists on our trip is the first couple of days. So when we get to Dublin, we're going to spend about 3 days in Dublin, and then it's all comedy after that. We go from Dublin, we go to Glasgow for the day. We do the show that night. The next day we go to Manchester, do the show that night. Then we go to Belfast, do the show that night. Then we go to Dublin, do the show in Dublin. And then we go to Liverpool. Then we go to Birmingham. And then we go to London. And that's it. And that's our tour. So it's every day. Oh, we have 1 day off in between Liverpool and London. So I'm going to guess maybe we'll go, maybe we'll stick around Liverpool and go see some Beatles stuff. Maybe. I don't know. Who knows? Maybe we will.
Stoned Man called them jag off condoms.
Oh, wow. Nice.
That's all. We already got a term there. And Stoop Sign said, I went to Edinburgh last year for Fringe. My sister performed. Was awesome. She's successful. I'm not. All right, Stoop Sign. Thank you for that. All right, keep going. Here we go. Someone told me I can get a lifetime supply of cards here. Tony B, I'm not. Oh, I get it. I get it. Here we go. Well, I guess it's finally okay to say that Jews run Hollywood, right? Cornpop
I thought
says.
it was the Arabs.
Hey, F. Hassau says, Pierce has flipped on Gaza, but has the tortoise in the hair yet? Send in Hinkle.
No.
And
I wonder if that guy's still alive.
right.
He had cancer bad.
Weed remembers Jimmy, just like Pepperidge Farms remembers, F. Hassau. Controversy of Zion by Douglas Reed, JBGT3 recommended it. The Controversy of Zion. Thank you for that recommendation. It's Sir Keir Starmer. It's Sir Kid Starver. Oh, Zim in Seattle. Thank you for that. It's not Sir Keir Starmer. It's Sir Kid Starver. That's it. Gene says Jimmy should see the new Avengers movie Thunderbolts. It deals with Jungian shadow, but there it's called The Void. Gene, thank you for the recommendation.
I keep losing followers on Twitter.
I wonder why.
They keep taking away my followers on Twitter.
I'm tired of these eugenicists, old nosy.
Yep.
Savage says, I hope Carol read my last super chat. Savage, thank you so much, Savage. Much appreciated. All that Rothschild gold is stolen from India, all 5 trillion, which is the same amount as the current U.S. monetary base. Funny that. Savage. Did the shooter's family come upon a bunch of money recently? Duly noted.
Oh, that's a good thing to look into.
Right? Very interesting.
Like the Hinckleys.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I didn't know about the Hinckleys.
Yeah, it's a Bush family friend.
Ah.
He was supposed to have dinner with Neil Bush the next night after he shot Reagan. The Sinclair gas family, and then the Bush Oil Company bailed out Sinclair's for that little favor.
Wow. To me, it sounds like they want to use the deposits of the American people to pay the U.S. debt. FSL. All right. Jimmy.
They don't want to pay it. They want to collapse America. They're not. It's just like California. They're not going to clear the dry brush or do any of that stuff to prevent a fire. Catherine Austin Fitts really summed it up very nicely. They stole all the money. It's like the Bernie mate. They can't afford to stop doing the scam. They've got to run it into the ground all the way.
Oh, it's so depressing. So depressing.
I can't wait till it happens. I can't wait. It's not depressing. I cannot wait for him to crash this pyramid. I cannot wait.
Hey, Corn Pop Kurt wants to ask you, have you ever heard of the book called Lilith's Cave?
Yeah, but I haven't read it, but I know it's some kind of magic.
Really?
Thing. Yeah.
All right. I've never heard about it. Thank you so much.
Kabbalah.
Got it. Pulled out my uninsured money from the bank and buy ammo and canned goods. Ham Hock. Thank you, Ham Hock, for that. All right. Jimmy, hey, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a show. I know you're probably already doing something fun this weekend, but are you doing something fun Saturday night? Because we're going to be at Two Roads in Studio City. It's a small, intimate space. We're going to have a hilarious live show. Stand up, ladies and gentlemen. And all you have to do is go to jimmydore.com, find the link for our tours, and use those links. Seriously, use those links, because when you use other links, you don't know where you're going to. All right. But our links go directly to the ticket space that you should be going to. All right. And we're going to be in Buffalo, Toledo, Montreal, Toronto, sold out, Ottawa, Glasgow, Manchester, Belfast, Dublin, Liverpool, Birmingham, London, Northampton, Edmonton, Calgary, New Westminster, Appleton, Wisconsin, Chicago. All you have to do is go to jimmydore.com, go to our website, and check out our upcoming tours. Maybe I'll see you this weekend. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Say no more. All right, Jimmy, back to you.
Oh, Tyler, they want us to do another show in Toronto. Have you seen those emails?
Oof.